So, hi everyone. I'm here today with Giulio Coluccia, who's the CEO of Toothpic, and Toothpic are a cybersecurity company, and they look at identity verification essentially in the mobile space. So Giulio, thanks very much for joining me today, and welcome. I suppose first off, it's probably worth explaining a little bit about some of the background that you've done, where you've come to basically the problem around identification.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Chris, for hosting me today. As you said, we are a cybersecurity company, and our focus is on the identification of devices, and in particular of mobile devices. And we do it with a unique technology that we developed in our previous activity at university that now we are proposing to the market. And the peculiarity of our technology is that we are able to recognize, to identify a specific piece of hardware, so a specific device, a specific smartphone, a specific tablet, and in general, any device which is equipped with a digital camera, because we are able to identify the unique pattern of manufacturing imperfections that uniquely characterizes a camera sensor. So each and every sensor that is mounted on our devices that we use every day.
So do you think I mean, so obviously we've all got passwords, we've used passwords a long time. There's like different types of passwords, and now we're using longer passwords, and they have to include certain characters, or even they need to be longer. I mean, and then we've been sort of moving to this whole thing around sort of like, additional authentication methods. I mean, do you think what we've got currently is not strong enough?
Yeah, definitely. Consider that passwords are a technology that has, it's something like 40, 50 years old. They were invented in an age where there were basically no users, and the few users that existed to log in, to big machines used to have 1, 2 accounts. So they had to remember a couple of passwords. Nowadays, all of us have access to dozens, 20, 30 accounts. And for each of them, we should remember a different, difficult password, difficult from the point of view that shouldn't be easily guessed. So it should be something ideally long and completely random, which is something that's impossible for us, which are human beings. So let's say that the first step was improving the security of passwords by accompanying them to the verification of a different factor. When we talk about passwords, we talk about knowledge password. So we prove that we know something, the password specifically. So the verification of something that we know has been paired with the verification of something that we have, something that we possess, which is the so-called possession factor. And in this kind of verification, all the systems based on the verification of, the code that appears on the device that the banks used to give us, but also all the technology that rely on the possession of the smartphone that range from, the OTP code that we received by text message, or something that is generated by an app, or, for example, when we receive a notification on our device.
And how much do you think the use of telephones or cell phones or mobile phones specifically is sort of a game changer? Because we've used that, even talked about one-time passwords, and obviously you've got your technology as well. It feels like that the mobile phone in particular seems like that's a real game changer in terms of like being able to do that third-party authentication.
Yeah, I can say that the choice of the smartphone as our verification of the possession factor device has been, as you said, a game changer, but has been, I can say, a sort of trade-off choice. Trade-off between what? Between usability and security, and also costs. Let me be more specific. When the banks used to give us the bank tokens, OTP, those OTP devices, it was a choice that was very inconvenient for the users because you need to manage, one or more of these devices. You may have stolen, they've been stolen, or you may lose it, and so on, or they run simply out of battery. But those devices were very secure because in some way they couldn't communicate with the world. They had no antenna, no port, you couldn't plug it to a PC, and so on.
These are like the little calculators you used to get with the buttons and those sorts of things.
Yeah. I have one in my bag if you want to show. Yes, exactly. But which is the device that everybody has in their pockets? It's their smartphone. So it was a natural choice. But a natural choice that, as I said, presented some trade-off because, of course, the smartphone, unlike the USB key, unlike the OTP key, has antennas, has connection, is connected 24/7, and is subject to any kind also of malicious software. There are a lot of malwares that are specifically designed to trick, the less educated users that are convinced by phishing emails to install this kind of malwares, and these malwares have the specific purpose of stealing the credentials that we have on our smartphones. So as you said, it was a game changer. It's not necessarily a choice that has improved the security of these processes. And I want also to add something more. The hardware tokens had a cost. There are some reports that show that the total cost of ownership of those kind of devices ranges between $20 and $40, which is quite a lot. Instead, with the smartphone, it's a device that the user manages, buys, somebody steals, and it costs much less. So the purpose of our technology is to kind of solving this trade-off between security and usability by giving a technology that can securely identify a user's device without impacting his user experience, but with the highest level of security possible.
And how do you think that cell phone penetration, I mean, it's pretty high now, but I mean, obviously you have different makes of cell phone, you have different types of phones. Some people still have very old phones, and not many of us now, but I mean, how does that sort of impact, particularly in financial services, almost like being able to offer service for everyone, right? So you want to be able to make sure that you got that universal service. And so is the fact we're so reliant on cell phones, do you think, limiting that, or do you think, and they have to look for other more expensive alternatives?
This is a problem, actually, because in order to serve also those kind of customers that do not have a smartphone, you need to keep alive some services like OTPs sent via text message, which are very insecure. It's a very insecure way of proving the possession of a device, which actually is proving the possession of a mobile phone. Because there are a lot of frauds that can be perpetrated to this kind of services. One is the SIM swap, but the other one is malware that can intercept those SMS text messages and so forward them to the malicious user. So you receive a message, the message with the OTP is sent to them, they can read it, and that's it. So it's very, in fact, also this kind of technology has been deprecated. I can cite, a document by the National Institute for Security and Technology of the United States, the NIST, which deprecated this kind of technology back in 2015. So it's almost 10 years. But, you have to keep them alive because there are some people that do not want to abandon this kind of devices, and of course you cannot force them to change to buy a smartphone, and so of course you cannot prevent them from accessing their bank accounts or their financial services, payment systems, and so on. So yeah, it's a problem from the point of view.
So tell me a little bit about unique identifiers. So I remember a technology, it was about 10 years ago, when they're talking about, I suppose, looking at phones that are unique and they had unique code within each of the phones and using a combination of those to uniquely identify with them. And when we were chatting before, you were saying there's some problems with that kind of technology, which is some of the stuff that you've kind of done. So maybe talk a bit about why the unique identifiers in the phones really has got problems with it as well?
Sure. Well, this is a very good question because, as you said, there are already in the phone some codes, some serial codes, some addresses that can some way uniquely identify a piece of hardware and so a phone which this hardware is mounted on. But I can see two kinds of problems. The first is that these codes are assigned by somebody, a producer, somebody has assigned these codes to that specific piece of hardware. And so in theory, these codes are clonable, are spoofable, are very easily spoofable. So you can pretend that a specific component has a code instead of the one that has been assigned during the production phase. So they are clonable in theory. And the other problem, which is a more practical problem, is that those kinds of identifiers used to be used also for targeting users with targeted advertising. And this is something that is related to privacy, and is something that the mobile operating systems, so Apple iOS and Android by Google, are really trying to fight. There was a commercial in the last months in Italy, I guess, but I guess it was spread at least in Europe, where with the latest update of iOS, you had this, there was this guy that was holding his iPhone like this, was, doing things on the phone, and then some people started sneaking what it was doing, and then these people became more and more, and then he just deactivated a toggle, and those people disappeared, poof, and they disappeared. And this is exactly what I meant, because in the latest update of iOS, Apple has disabled by default all these kind of identifiers. And these kind of identifiers were used to provide users with targeted advertising, but were also used by, authentication systems, anti-fraud prevention systems. And this is a problem for this kind of companies, which actually use those kind of identifiers, in a legit way. Okay, also selling advertisement is a legit way of using those codes. But the fact is that now those codes are disabled by default. And there are statistics that show that only less than 20% of users actually enable those codes. And so it's getting very hard to rely on those codes to identify reliably a device. Which is the difference between those codes and what we do? Well, what we do to identify the device, the characteristic of the hardware that we identify has not been provided by somebody, but it's inside the electronics of the device itself. Nobody has assigned that device ID, but we read something that stays inside the electronics of the device. And this of course makes this kind of identifiers unclonable, because these kind of characteristics are related to processes which the producers have no control on. So they're not able to remove them. They're not able to clone them into different devices. And moreover, those identifiers are not soft identifiers, but are hard identifiers. And so they resist also the most extreme ways to reset codes, like formatting the device. If a fraudster wants to fraud several users with the same device, all he needs to do is to format the device between two consecutive frauds. By formatting the device, all the soft identifiers will reset, and so that device won't be identifiable in a sequence of frauds. Instead, the characteristic that we read in the camera sensor stays there, because of course you cannot format hardware.
So it's almost like you're measuring, almost like with great accuracy, the physical imperfections that naturally occur within the manufacturing process, which are going to happen. There is always some some. I mean, you look at Six Sigma, I suppose. There's always some imperfections that are going to happen. They're not material to affect the function of the phone, but if you measure it, then it becomes unique, right? And a combination of them probably as well.
Exactly. Yeah, they are called POFs, physical and global functions. And as you said, they have no practical effect. You know, you have never realized that in the pictures that you take with the phone, there is a sort of fingerprint of the camera, but it's actually there and it can be read, it can be extracted. You have to process the pictures, but you can read them.
It's almost like, just making me think, it's almost like facial recognition for phones. So just like our facial recognition for humans, right? We're all humans. Doesn't make material different, but yeah.
It's a biometry of the phone. So if you pair this biometry of the phone with the biometry of the user, you get, let's say, okay, you can never be 100% sure, but you can have the highest level security that you can provide now, and you can go over the use of passwords, for example, because you are already doing multi-factor authentication or multi-factor verification, because you verify the possession factor, the biometry of the phone, with the inherence factor, the biometry of the person. Combine them together, you obtain a multi-factor authentication scheme, and you can skip the verification of something that user knows. You can keep, in that case, you can keep it as a backup authentication. And so being a backup authentication, you don't use it in the day-by-day operation. So you can ask for a very difficult password that users can write down, put in a ruler in the desk. They won't use it every day, because every day they will use the most user-friendly techniques, and you can use the very difficult password as a backup, for example.
Yeah. So you think the days of passwords really are kind of numbered? I mean, certainly my days of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as a password is gone, or password as a password. But you think the days just generally of passwords are sort of completely going to disappear, where we're going to have biometric, which is us, and then sort of like the bio device in a way. I think it was kind of the way you were sort of describing it, which uniquely identifies, the like a third party type device.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's say, there was a nice joke by Barack Obama and some years ago. He was talking to a cybersecurity conference, and he said, my password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. And everybody laughed, because he wasn't using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. But okay, I cannot forecast if it's going to be days or months or years. I guess that in some way passwords will stay there, because for some applications they're still good, as I said, for example, for a backup. But for sure, the trend is to abandon the passwords, at least for the day-by-day use. So when you access your email, you access your bank account, you access your e-commerce website, the trend is to abandon them. It's not something that can be done super easily, because it's something that is there since decades, so it takes a while to abandon them. But the trend is set, and I guess that this is the way.
And in terms of, I suppose, personal authentication, in terms of individuals, so we've had the passwords. I suppose you got pins that have also gone out, but then we've also got fingerprints, I suppose, on the phones, and we've also got like facial recognition as well. Do you see any sort of trends in terms of like different preferences for customers for using each of those? I mean, we're all comfortable with passwords, although they're a bit of a fiddle on a phone, I think. But I mean, but fingerprints, and now it seems to be more sort of facial recognition. Is you seeing any kind of trends in terms of preferences?
Well, let's say that there are some events that cannot be easily forecasted. For example, everybody liked facial recognition, and then the COVID came.
Yeah,
you need to wear a mask, and so the facial recognition system stopped working. So it's good to have alternatives. But let me be a little bit more clear about those kind of biometric verifications. They actually are not biometric verifications. What I mean, when you use your, fingerprint or your face to be recognized by your banking app, for example, you want to access your bank account from your home banking app. Well, actually, the bank doesn't know anything about your face, doesn't know anything about your finger, and they don't want to know anything about them because it's a very sensitive data that needs to be treated. And if some kind of this data leaks, you can replace a phone, but you cannot replace your face or your finger. So it's something that they don't want to treat. So they rely in some way to the verification which is done by the operating system of your phone, which is something that stays in local on your phone. I mean, your finger doesn't travel over the internet or your face doesn't travel over the internet. But this means that the bank has no clue if the finger that is unlocking the phone is actually your finger or your wife's finger or your son's finger or your cousin's face. They don't know anything about it. So what they verify actually is the device, meaning that using your finger, you unlock a credential that stays on your device, which is remotely verified. And this is a subtle difference because you actually need to protect the thing that is stored on your phone because it is that quantity that is actually verified remotely on the banking server, for example. When you show your face to the phone, it's actually your phone that is unlocking a credential that is stored on your phone that the bank will verify. So it makes a lot of sense to protect also the quantity that is protected by this kind of biometry. So you asked me, is there a preferred way? Well, let's say that it's not always the user that can influence, the kind of technology that their bank, for example, if you want to keep the example of the bank, will use. And of course, for the developers of systems, it's a natural choice to choose what the operating systems, at least the most widespread ones, so Android and iOS, are offering, in terms of cybersecurity. And so I don't think that it's, I don't know. I don't think that a user will change its bank because it doesn't like the way its bank is making the authentication process. But you can see these trends in, in places where they are not mandatory, but they are optional. When those kind of systems are optional, so the user is able to choose whether to use it or not, they will more likely activate those systems when they are user-friendly. When they are tricky to use, complicated to use, they simply say, okay, forget it. I will risk something. Yeah. I know. Maybe I'm aware of it. Maybe I'm not. But I won't use it if it's too hard to use.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting in terms of, go back to my days in credit cards. If you look at in the US, they never check signatures, whereas in Europe, they always check signatures in terms of whether they matched or not. It's just generally, if you just look at it in the shops, and it's kind of interesting in terms of like usability in different cultures. How that sort of plays out. So if you've got encrypted, almost like an encrypted key essentially on your phone, how does having that's an identifier for your phone, but there must be risks associated with that. And so can those be cloned, which is where being able to uniquely identify the phone as well comes in as well?
Yeah. About what you said, there are two things that must be said. The first is that, of course, the process that associates a device with the user must be robust. Because, attackers, they say that if you have a chain, the strength of the chain corresponds to the strength of the weakest link. So if you make a ring stronger, okay, they will move the target to the second in the list. So that process needs to be strong, of course. And the other way, yes, you need to make those identifiers unclonable in order to be sure that even if your device is cloned, cloning a phone is a very, it's very hard to realize. I mean, if somebody steals your phone, you realize it immediately because you're used to have it in your hands almost always. You have the phone in your hands. If you forget the phone on the table, you realize it immediately. If somebody clones your phone, it's like if it was stolen, but you don't realize immediately because you still have your object in your hand. No? So if somebody is able to clone the keys that are verified by your bank, it's like that. It's the very same as it had your phone. So it's in theory they are able to access your account. So having credentials that are unclonable is of extreme importance because you have the guarantee that as long as your phone is in your hands, nobody else will be able to use it to access your accounts.
And one of the things that the model I would use for fraud is, I mean, it tends to be that the cost of being able to perpetrate the fraud is quite important for the fraudsters, right? So, so the more you increase the cost to them around having to, like, the cost of cloning, the cost of creating things, it affects their business model, right? Which makes it unprofitable, which means they'll go elsewhere, right? So which protects you, right? Which seems like this is yet another barrier we can introduce to increase the security and sort of, you know, mean the fraud doesn't come to us.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, nobody honest in the field of cybersecurity will tell you that its technology is 100% secure because it's impossible. As you said, you can put, further gates, higher gates again around what you want to protect. But as you said, and now I will mention the case I was mentioning before. If you force the fraudster to buy a new phone every time he wants to steal, 1,000 euros from a bank account, well, it becomes less and less convenient for him, especially if this phone is, for example, an iPhone that can cost 1,000 euros. So, if you put them in those conditions of not being able to use the same device to perpetrate a number of frauds larger than one, well, in that case, you are making his business model, less convenient for them.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see increases in fraud? I mean, it feels like that is a trend that's taking place, and it doesn't seem like that's a trend that's going to stop. I mean, just what do you see the future of fraud trends and where we're kind of sitting in the environment we're currently in?
Well, I don't want to say something trivial, but our world is becoming more and more digital, and COVID has kind of accelerated this process because a lot of things that one could do also in person now can be done digitally, and then some people that weren't used to do something digitally have now realized that it can be done. So instead of taking a long line in order to do something at the post office, they can do it at home, and it's very convenient. So the more this trend keeps going, well, the more the fraudsters will focus on those kind of frauds because they're more easy to do. It's always a matter of being one step ahead, one step forward with the person that is trying to to steal from you. So I guess that this is a trend that cannot be stopped. This is a trend that cannot be stopped.
I do think it's a fascinating topic, and Giulio, thanks very much for explaining it. But as we become more connected, and as you start to get more and more connected, and it seems like that's the trend, the risk carries on increasing. And then as we become more sophisticated, even after COVID, it becomes higher and higher. And so it's like it's interesting to see how the industry is really reaching up to kind of meet that kind of task, really. So it's fascinating. It really is. So Giulio, thank you very much for explaining it all. It's been fascinating. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.